How often do you get the opportunity to talk with a beloved weaver, teacher, and author? It is my pleasure to welcome Tom Knisely. Tom and I are going to be talking about his journey, his creative journey, as he's been after this whole sustainability thing for many, many years. So, Tom, it is wonderful to bring you on for this interview. And can you please introduce and share a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Amber, for asking me to do this interview tonight. And I'm always excited to talk about recycling and repurposing things, but also to talk about fiber arts and weaving. Yeah, this has just been a wonderful journey. I've woven for many, many years. I've taught for more than 40 years, and I'm a
Mhm.
spinner and a weaver and a creator. So the idea of just taking raw materials and then turning them into something lovely and useful just really close to my heart. So I started off as a high school kid, and I bought an antique spinning wheel, and I was just intrigued by the whole mechanism, how those moving parts worked to create a thread. And there it is. I'm making a thread and it's winding onto a bobbin. And I thought, what am I going to do with this thread? And it just led one thing, as they say, the rabbit hole into another. But I knew just at an early, early age that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And so I became a weaver and then worked for a company who was a studio named the Manning's Hand Weaving School and Supply Center. And
Mhm.
from that, I taught for many, many years. And then I was approached by Stackpole Books to write a book. And one of my first books was all about rag rugs. And
Mhm.
again, it was close to my heart. I just love the idea of repurposing old fabrics, tearing them apart, and then weaving those strips into a warp on a loom, and then turning something that's going to last for many, many, many more decades after that.
So, let's rewind to that first book. And what kind of a reception did you find when people came across it? Because you're talking about a time period in which you're doing some of the sustainability and all of that, and you're doing some kind of new and unique things. What was the reaction to writing that first book about rag rugs?
It was very, very good. I tell you, there had been some other books written about rag rugs previous to that, talking about the history and how people would tear up old clothing and then sew the strips together. It became a little bit like a quilting bee, where people would get
Mm.
together and stitch rags and gossip about the neighbors, and it just became a community there. And so some other books have been written about that. But what I found was that there were a couple sort of key things missing. Like if you were getting started, how do I know what rags to use? And how many do I need to make a rug that's going to work in front of my kitchen sink? So I remember there was a sentence in one of those early books that said, you need about 4 to 5 pounds of rags. Well, I can see that. If you're winding rags into a ball, it would be very easy to, let's say, put them into a scale and weigh that out. But if I was looking for something specific, a particular type of fabric that I wanted to use and go into a fabric store, I say, oh, I need 4 pounds of this bolt. Well, they would look at you as
Mhm.
if you had two heads on your shoulder and say, okay, well, how does this feel? Does this feel like 4 or 5 pounds? So I took a little bit more scientific approach to that, and I wove many, many samples with denim fabric, corduroy
Mhm.
fabric, um, batik fabric, and just plain cotton sheeting like you might use if you were going to do quilting. And I wove 1 square foot of each fabric just to see how much fabric did that take. Then I could take a different approach, and I usually find it takes about 1 yard of new fabric to
Mhm.
weave a square foot. So if you're going to be doing a 2 by 3 rug, Amber, it just takes about 6 yards of fabric to do that. But that can also work if you're looking at an old king size sheet too. But you know what? Some of the most lovely parts of this is going to thrift stores or having somebody give you a load of sheets and you say, here's a blue sheet, here's a green sheet, and oh, this pretty brown sheet and red sheet, and tear them into strips. And then as an artist, just say, how am I going to use these strips of fabric? Maybe in some kind of sequential order, or just completely higgledy-piggledy and just see what I get out of it. Yeah. So
Well,
everything's sort
that's
of open-ended.
it's so interesting too because that you brought up the important part of it, the artisan part of that, right? Where someone can show up with something that was interesting that used to be used, that's secondhand, that's, hey, can you do something with this? That that comes up a lot for artisans. And so the how do I do something with this random pile of fabric I've been given?
Sure.
And and then turn it into a rug is such an interesting and fun concept. You give it a new life at that point.
You're absolutely right. And then when I did my second book, Rags to Rugs, um, so many great stories came out of that, like recycling an old army blanket that had a couple of moth and mouse holes in it and then giving it life again. Otherwise, that army blanket might have gotten thrown in the trash. And they're
Mhm.
not really attractive, those dark green, sort of nasty looking old army blankets. But if you would put some nice colored threads in the warp direction on the loom and then weave that into it, it's very, very pretty. Or another one of my favorite stories with this, when my wife and I moved into this house, the walls were a horrible color. And Cindy said, I am not moving in there until we get this painted. So we had a painter come in, paint the house. And I walked in to see how the guy was doing. And I looked on the floor, and there were all these drop cloths with all kinds of people's paint colors all over it. They looked like a Jackson Pollock canvas. And I begged him
Mhm.
for one, and I wove a rag rug up for the book out of that. And then when I could present him with a rug afterwards and say, this was your drop cloth, he was just flabbergasted. He could never have believed that the things that he works with on a daily basis and he never thinks about turned into something really beautiful for their kitchen. So
Mhm.
it's stories like that that I just absolutely love, giving new life to something that otherwise would just be completely overlooked.
And for him too, the "You want my old dirty drop cloth for something?"
Yeah,
had to be this, okay." And that so often happens with the recycling process where, eh, part of the gift is that you can envision how it can go into something, or even if not, you can experiment with how it will go into something, even if you can't directly see it, where a lot of people can't even fathom that that would happen in the first place.
well,
And
that's true.
so right, it's just that that's part of that creative artisan gift of being able to say, "I'm going to transform this into a rug," and initially, that would be far too big of a leap for him, but then when he sees the presented one, all of a sudden the entire process unfolds in front of his eyes of, "Oh, I see what you did there,"
Right.
in that transformative process.
Exactly. And how different it looks now. It's not just a dirty drop cloth on the floor, but now it's really something lovely. I remember somebody had given me a beautiful quilt. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is so lovely, but it's got tears. It has holes in it. I think most people would say, I'm going to put this down on the floor for the dog or give it to some kind of a
Mhm,
let's say the SPCA for puppies to roll around on. But I looked at it and I
mhm,
thought there are hundreds and hundreds of hours and thousands of stitches have gone into
mhm,
this quilt. And although the pattern was really large and big, if I cut this into little narrow strips and reweave it, it's going to take on another look. And so instead of that big bold pattern being developing as the rug, it's going to get little splotches of color here and there, and I'm giving that more life again. So I'm taking an old quilt that most people would just sort of throw away, and then making it into a rug that's really rather pretty.
mhm. And now we've talked about craft books, but there are some other books that you write as well. So tell me a little bit about one of your other passions because you're a multifaceted writer when it
I
comes to different
am.
books.
And I've had three daughters and enjoyed reading to them. And I also have grandchildren now and I love reading to them. But Amber, a woman came into the studio one time and she said, Tom, I read an article that you did for Handwoven magazine, and you had done a rug for the magazine, and I would love to see that rug so I can get an idea of what I can do myself from that. You don't happen to have uh, an example of that or the rug. I said, you know what? I actually do. And so I ran upstairs and I went to the cupboard and I got the rug out and ran downstairs and went to open it up and show it to her. And when I shook the rug out, oh my gosh, you will never believe this, but loads of little peanut shells and sunflower seeds fell out of it. And Amber, there was a hole in it about this big, right in the middle of the rug. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hadn't looked at that rug in so long. Some mouse or a family of mice moved in and made it their winter home.
Oh
And
my.
took all the goodies in with there and had dinner. So after I got over my embarrassment of the whole thing, I thought I'm going to turn this around and actually write a children's book about this experience. And it's called A
Hmm.
Weaver's Surprise. And it's all about how a family of mice have moved into this weaver's cottage and made themselves at home with that. But the turnaround is that a woman who came to buy a rug was scared off by the mice, and the weaver felt terrible about it and embarrassment, just the same as I was. But the weaving mice rewove another entire carpet for this woman, and it's very, very cute. Megan Lloyd, who's a great children's book illustrator, did a fabulous job, and I was really fortunate because she's a weaver herself and she's a spinner. So she knows how everything is going to work. And when we were done with that, I'm just going to do a little plug. We did another one called Spinning Tales. And you can get an idea of
Oh,
how lovely her illustrations are. And the same idea, these
yeah.
dear little mice take it upon themselves to help weave a blanket for this weaver. So I've written two children's books, and they've really been well received. And it's fun to read it to 5 to 8 year olds, and gets them thinking too about, oh, there are weavers, there are spinners, and people still do this today. And this is how
Hmm.
we go from a sheep's fleece all the way to a blanket.
Hmm. And I think that concept comes up a lot too about preserving some of these crafts, and so that that children even realize that we can do all of
Oh,
these things.
sure. It's
And
not old timey.
no, it's not
It's current.
old-timey, and it's rather fun to be able to do all of these things, but unless someone actually introduces them to it, where would they learn?
Correct.
And to see it come in a children's book form. Now, what kind of reactions have you seen to any of your books? So we talked about how well the early ones were received. How about the children's books, and as you kept releasing more books, what, any noticings or any kind of changes that you have noticed over time?
Well, the children's books were really well received. And I think in my years of teaching, most of the people who have been my students fall within a certain age group. And most
Mhm.
of them are, let's say, over 50. So they're
Mhm.
looking for something like this that they can sit down with their grandchildren because they're weavers themselves or they're spinners themselves, and it helps to
Mhm.
make a connection with their grandchildren. So that
Mhm.
was really, really well received. But the other thing that I wanted to share with people is because we're all grandparents at this point, handmade baby blankets. And
Oh,
so,
nice.
yes, we're in that sort of demographics where you want to do something for your grandchild, weave them a baby blanket. It doesn't have to be out of recycled materials, but how nice for that child to have an heirloom. And with something like a baby blanket, they can enjoy it as a baby, of course, then as a toddler with their favorite stuffy, and then I don't know, maybe take it to college and wipe up beer when they're in college. You know, it's going to last that long. It's going to last that
Uh,
long.
well,
Yeah.
that's part of the beauty of hand making things,
Yeah.
right? And particularly with a lot of textiles is they will last that long. And so that's the delightful part about it. Now, you have a new book that's coming out this fall. Would you like
I
to
do.
share with our
Oh, I
audience a little
do.
bit more about that new book?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. Yes, it's a book about clasped Weft. Now, I know that's sort of hard to say, but it's Clasped, clasp. And what it basically is talking about are two threads coming into the loom from opposite ends and actually interlacing with one another, hooking together, and then traveling back to the selvage edge again. So let's say you have two shuttles, or you have a shuttle and a cone of thread on the side, and they might be of different colors even. When one shuttle goes across and interlocks with the other one and it goes back out again, I have the option of moving it back and forth to make some designs. And I thought I would show you a little bit what that sort of looks like. Here you can see a tea towel where the warp, believe it or not, Amber, is actually little red and white stripes in the warp way direction. But in the weft way direction, that's going left to right, we've got blue on one side, and I alternated red and white on the other. And I've got this really interesting pattern going on in the center, which gives it like another dimension in here. We got three different parts going on.
That's really
And
incredible.
another little example here, which sort of is a pattern, very traditional pattern from a coverlet, but the ground fabric is what I clasped. And I have one side of this table runner very light in color and the other side very dark in color. And yet the pattern thread running through that is all of the same color. And when my mind started looking at this a little bit closer, I thought, there is examples of this everywhere. And my wife and I were traveling in Japan, and we went into a hallway going down to our room, and the carpeting on the floor was so impressive that I thought, I'm coming home, and I wove for the book another example of the carpeting. I basically was able to reproduce it. I took a quick photograph of the carpet in the hotel hallway and reproduced it, that readers could also do the same thing in colors of their own. So it's really been a lot of fun just going through with different patterns, examples
Hmm.
of it. Here we go. Get it onto the screen so people can see. You often
Yeah.
find in this technique this sort of zigzagging effect. Sort of looks like an EKG report, but you can do very crisp geometric designs with that too. So we have in the book about 30 different projects that people could follow through, and they could take it to any dimension they want. They could make it very simple, or they could get it really quite complex if they cared to.
Hmm. And it's amazing to see how you, at this skill level, and I always talk about, you build a skill for years on end. And then eventually, when you go to Japan and you find a carpet you like, you can recreate it. it's,
Absolutely.
it's just so beautiful to see the skills building upon the skills over time and the absolutely amazing things that people can create out of that. And so I have to say a huge thank you to Stackpole Books, who I know you work with, because they are doing a giveaway. So everyone that had registered for this event, is their names are all going into a hat, and one lucky winner is going to get a copy of Rags to Rugs and your brand new Weaving with Clasped Weft as well. So
And I
as
just so happen to have a copy right here for you to
look at
see. And you
that,
can
look at
see
that.
some of the carpets on the front. So, yes, good luck to the happy, lucky winner.
Absolutely. So now, if you want to learn more about Tom, you think, all right, I'm interested. I want to learn more about Tom. The best place to find more information about him is on Stackpole Books. You are not going to find him on social media. So if you find anyone claiming to be him, it's not him, because he is not on social media. So you can find more information about Tom on the Stackpole Books website. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, Tom. This is an absolute delight to share more about your career and your journey, and
Oh,
to share
thank you
about
so
your
much. I
your new
appreciate
book.
this. Yeah, it's
Any
been wonderful.
final words, any final words of wisdom for a newbie who's just starting this journey of repurposing and weaving? What advice would you give as our final thought?
Well, I would highly recommend wherever you're listening from, see if there isn't a local weavers guild or a spinners group that you can join up with. Take a class from somebody that has some experience with it and dive in. You cannot go wrong. All you can do is have a lot of fun with it. And you're going to make mistakes along the way, and you're going to learn a little bit from every one of those mistakes. But be a be open and be creative and just do it. Just do it.
I love that. I love that final thought. Thank you, everyone, for joining us that is watching, and it's time for us to all go just do it.
Thank you.